all I can basically say is we're really, really, really excited to be here.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for introducing our opening, Maren. I am Nia Dowell, and together, Maren and I make up 2 of the 4 program chairs. And so we're joined by a much wider, amazing team of individuals.
Yes, so for the organizing committee, we would really like to thank Mark, Grace, and Nicole. They're all here today as well with us. And without them, we would have been totally lost and could not have done today and what we will see in the next few days. So thank you to those. Really, without you, we'd be lost at all. Of course, thanks also go to our 2 co-program chairs, Srečko and George. Again, without them, we'd be lost, and it only makes a team, or it needs a team to get things done. So again, this is really what we needed. We couldn't have done it without them. As for the practitioner chairs, we would like to thank Mike and Liz. They have also done some wonderful work on getting the practitioner report sorted and everything. And of course, we had 3 wonderful workshop chairs, Caitlin, Paul, and Angela, who've done a terrific job. Already in the past 2 days, we had the workshops going, and some of you probably have attended those workshops already. And from what I could see and follow on Whova and on Twitter, some amazing discussions have already been going on there. So thanks again also to the workshop chairs for organizing those.
Yes, and a special thanks to our poster and demo chairs, Yishan and Justin. As you'll see, we'll be doing our posters and demos in Gather Town, which is incredibly and amazingly retro. And you really have to experience to understand what I'm talking about. And also we have a wonderful team for our doctoral consortium made up of Stephanie, Sasha, Michael, and Simon. So a huge thanks to them, as well as our social media chairs, Bodong and Elle, and a wonderful web manager, Yancy, and last but not least, our proceedings editor, Abhinava. So thank you all to this wonderful team, which we hoped would be here sitting on the beach, enjoying a wonderful intellectual conversations with the breeze in our hair. But unfortunately, we realized throughout the planning process that it was very unlikely that we were going to be able to do that this year. But we're not bummed out about it too much. We're excited to see you all virtually and experience you in all of the cool platforms that we'll be using over the next few days. And this time around, we're using actually 3 different platforms, as you guys have started to realize. And it's not nearly as complicated as some people might initially think. So Whova, where you probably have already signed into and you're watching this from, will be really our place where we communicate with others, where we have conversations in the chat, and we also where we post our questions in the Q&A section for presenters. So Zoom is really just a platform, a delivery platform for this conference. So we won't be using the chat features here. And it won't be a webinar style, so like it was last year. And this is to sort of facilitate more of the so you don't feel like you're sitting in a black void alone watching a presenter. So hopefully that is a little bit better, because that was one of the things people talked about desiring from last conference. And then finally we have Gather Town, which I sort of touched on earlier that we'll see in a second. So just sort of a high level quick user guide. So if you're in Whova, this is sort of your landing page, right? You have over here all of the sub pages where you can go to your agenda here. And this is going to show you the full agenda. So everything, and you can go through if you haven't already done so, and pick out things and say, oh, first you want to make sure you're switched to your local time. That's really important, and it just reduces confusion. But then once you're in your full agenda, you can go through and add things to your agenda by simply clicking add to your agenda. There's also an option there when you click on that to add it to your like Google Calendar or whatever, so you can easily access it. And then also, once you have things in your agenda, you have your subset of talks you want to attend. You should be attending all of them, obviously, but if there's only a few you want to attend, you can just go to your agenda. And then this is what a screen you're going to see until up until 2 minutes before each presentation. And that means that all of the presentations are locked. So you cannot enter a presentation because it opens 2 minutes prior to the presentation starting. Once we're 2 minutes into the talk, 2 minutes prior to the talk, this will open up, and as you probably saw today, you'll have 2 options. You'll have Zoom or watch it in Whova. That's really just a preference. There's not one that's better than the other. Some prefer Zoom just because it's a larger screen, and Whova, because of the other features, it sort of restricts the speaker presentation window. So when you're watching the presentations, make sure you can chat with your colleagues over here. But if you actually have a question for the presenters, put it in the Q&A section. You just click on this button down here and it'll start to populate here. And from there, I'll let Maren talk to you about the posters.
Yes, so for the posters and demos in the menu in Whova, you will also have a way to click there, and then you can look at all the posters and demos that have been accepted for this year's conference. And you can click through the posters already there. However, we will also have a poster and demo session. Actually, we will have 2 poster and demo sessions, but they will take place in GatherTown. As you can see here, you have a map of GatherTown. It looks a bit small at this point, but once you're actually in GatherTown, you are this little 80s computer game figurine walking around, and you can even choose how you look and what color hair you have. And it's a very pixelated and very joyful way of communicating with people. And as you can see at the bottom, there's a beach. At some point this week, we will have yoga at the beach. And as you see at the top, we have different rooms for round tables. We have a lounge, and there is a room for the poster and demo session. And that's where that will happen. So once you're in GatherTown, find your way around. Also, some of the social breaks will take place there. A thing you should take into account, though, is that Gather only works with Chrome and Firefox browsers. So please use one of those. All other browsers usually have some sort of trouble, and the functionalities aren't what they're supposed to be. The very first time you join Gather, you will need to add an email address, and please use the email address that you used to register for the conference with. But this really should only happen for the first time. Once you have done that, you can just switch however often you want between Whova and Gather, and no more login needed. It's just for the very first time.
Wonderful, thanks, Maren.
Yes, and we have different plenary sessions throughout the following days, next to the normal paper presentations that take place at a conference. On day 1, which is basically right now starting, we have the conference opening, where we are all at this very moment, followed by the first keynote in some minutes. And after the keynote, we have an icebreaker session, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. And at the end of day 1, we have a wrap-up session, which will be in Gather, and you can just meet people there and talk to whoever you want. On day 2, we start with poster and demo session part A, followed by keynote number 2. And then later we have the Solar AGM, which is the annual general meeting. And every one of you is very much invited to take part in that. And then we have poster and demo session part B, followed again by a wrap-up. And on day 3, we start with the awards ceremony. So this is where we will hand out the best paper awards and also some other awards that you will see. And then at the end of day 3, we have the 3rd keynote, followed by the closing session. And another click, please. Yes, thank you. So for the icebreaker session, if you can click another slide, please. Yes. For the icebreaker session, which will take place right after the keynote of today, just go into Whova, and on the left in the menu, you will find a point that says network table. So just click on that, and then you will see several tables basically popping up, and you can just choose which table you want to go to, and then network with several people. So this is as a kind of an icebreaker session at the start of this conference for maybe some people are completely new to this community and want to start to get to know some people. Maybe some people already found within Whova in the different discussion boards some topics there that popped up, or they want to continue a discussion from a workshop. So feel free to use that time and use the icebreaker session after the first keynote. Also, for the proceedings, of course, again, all the papers that are presented at this conference are going to be published, or actually already are published. The full and short papers are part of the ACM proceedings, and they are available already in the digital library throughout this week completely for free. But also, we have made sure this year from Solar that the proceedings of ACM will be available open access, which means that after the conference, the proceedings will be available through the conference website forever, basically, for free. So even though they might be locked again within the ACM Digital Library, if you go to the conference library, anyone, not only registered people, but anyone can access the proceedings there. All other papers, which means the poster papers, demo papers, doctoral consortium papers, workshop papers, practitioner reports, and those papers that were submitted to workshops, they are all published in the companion proceedings. And they will also be added on the conference websites and are openly accessible for anyone. Yes, and speaking of proceedings, the LAK proceedings are, again, as in some previous years, the only conference proceedings in a list of journals that are ranked in this top 10 of publications about educational technology in Google Scholar. So all these other 9 you see here are journals, and the LAK proceedings are the only conference proceedings in that top 10. And we're very proud of that we still are in this top 10, and we have been for a number of years now.
Yes, that's super impressive. And I'm very excited for the proceedings too, that they'll be accessible to everyone around the world during and after the conference for free. So if you have any colleagues that aren't able to join for whatever reason the conference, please always point them in that direction. We hope to always have this moving forward. I am super excited to say that this is officially the largest LAK ever. So that's really amazing. So we have, these are the registration numbers for the main conference, and what we're looking at is from 2018 to 2021. We see this wonderful linear increasing line from last year, which was, obviously going to be face-to-face up until 11 days prior. We had a 559, and as of, I think, an hour ago, we have 596 registered main conference participants for LAK, for LAK21. This is also representative of the wonderful and growing international team that we have, of participants that we have. So we have, 59 Australian / New Zealand, over 100 individuals coming and joining us from Europe. Sorry, I just got distracted by Slack. And we have 14 African and Middle Eastern participants joining us, 82 from Asia joining us, over 300 from North America, 14 from South America. So, and that gives us a total of 626 participants for LAK21 this year. And that number is obviously slightly higher because that is reflecting those that only registered for the workshops as well. So it's the main conference plus the workshops as well. And so we're also really diverse in terms of what do we do? Who are we? So we have a wonderful distribution of people from like K-12, corporate industry areas, as well as nonprofits, PhD students, professors. And so I think this is just reflective of the really neat community that we have. And so I love to see it growing even more. I wish that we had a slide that sort of reflected how our international representation has changed over time. So maybe that's something we'll cover later. Yes, so we expected, this is a number of submissions from the initial LAK, the first LAK in 2011, all the way up until 2021. And this is not a number of accepts, it's a number of submissions, but we expected, right, it's given the year that we've had, that we would see a decline in submissions this year. But I think what is really fascinating is if you look at where that decline is and where it's not, is actually we have comparable full paper submissions. So compared to last year, which was originally supposed to be face-to-face, we had 137 full paper submissions. And that's on par with the 122 that we had this year. So that's really great to see. The similar numbers for the short papers as well, right? So 124 compared to last year and 93 this year. And so the decline is really more reflective of the posters and demos, is where we saw like a pretty drastic decline. So we went from 117 last year to 60 demonstrations or posters. But still, I think it's wonderful to see that people, the substantive work that people are contributing hasn't remained unchanged despite this wonderful, glorious year that we've had. Okay, so Full paper acceptance rate. There's not a lot to say about this slide besides the fact that, you know, LAK is remained a really competitive conference and a really welcoming conference at the same time. But our acceptance rate this year was on par with the recent years, being at 34%. And then I'll let Maren tell you about our global impact.
Yes, so here you can see every country that has an author represented at LAK is colored in, and those countries with darker colors have more authors. So as you can see, the US is the darkest, so most of the authors come from the US, which is not really surprising and has been the case the past years as well. And as you can also see, Australia is a bit darker than the other countries. So they also have quite a number of authors represented here at the conference. Yeah, and in this slide here, you can see the co-authorship countries. So basically any paper that is authored by people coming from different countries is represented in this slide, and the darker the connection and the larger the bullets, the more of those papers. And overall, there were 25% of all papers had some co-authorship from different countries. So this is nice to see that there's also connections spanning into Asia, into the Middle East, into South America, etc. So this is very exciting to see. In this slide here, you can see some authorship networks growing over the years, basically. So an author that has been at many conferences is darker, and an author that is new this year is very light. And also the larger the circle is, the more publications that author has had over the years. So I'm throwing in a blind guess, we don't have names, but I assume that this large circle is probably Dragan. We had the Dragan factor a few years ago, but I'm assuming that this is his circle.
Yeah.
And here we have another nice visualization here. If you can click on the video, please. And here we have the evolution of authorship over the different years. So we started with 55 authors in the first year. And as you can see, this grows quite nicely. So basically the color of the nodes indicate the first year that an author has participated, and you can see how this evolves over the different years. And we're just growing and growing and growing, and still new authors are coming in every year. And then last year we were at 1878, and this year we have 2,169 total authors of LAK. So it's a very growing community.
Wonderful.
And here as the final visualization, you have some of the themes and some of the topics coming up in the different publications. So again, a lot of data mining is happening. Higher education is a big thing. MOOCs are still happening. We have quite a bit on collaborative learning. We also have assessing student learning, self-regulated learning, of course. So you can see the different topics popping up in the publications. And all these wonderful visualizations have been done by Javier. He does them for us every year. So a big thank you to Javier again for doing them for us this year. This is always really nice to just show people what is happening. And with this, I will pass over to Grace, and she will give you some more announcements of the things that will be happening in the next few days.
Wonderful. Welcome, Grace. I think
Grace,
you're muted.
Of course. Yeah, I'm so technical. I turned my video back on, but didn't turn my microphone back on. So thanks again to the program committee, as we mentioned. So with Mara and Nia and George and Stretchko, it's done an amazing job from transitioning again from what we were hoping was to be face-to-face to fully online again. And again, with the organizing team is representing Mark and Nicole and myself. One of the fun things we want to do, which was different from LAK20 when we had to pivot so quickly, was to have a lot of more fun things, little fun contest activities, sorts of things to come in. So we'll be talking more about them, but there's a photo gallery contest. You can see, for posting gallery, people get the most likes, for writing funny captions, for going through back and forth as well. We have that. If we could see the next slide. So within Who've as well, just automatically you can see, leaderboard, you can see activities, you can see who's leading at the moment when I grab the screenshot. So this is when you think this is just for the pre-conference. The activity of people participating and what's happening and what's going through is coming on. Lots of meetups people are already organizing. So within Whova, as Maren and Nia talked about before, what we can do, how we can join, what we can do, getting started, online resources. So there's lots of activity and things happening, which is coming back and forth. So we're very happy to see that. And we're happy to see that, as I noticed in the chat, I think Mark had posted he was at the AERA earlier a few days ago, and they had a little difficulty with their platform. So far, so good. We haven't blown up to 4,100 tweets in the first 30 minutes of people complaining that they can't find what's going on. So that's positive. Our goal is not to blow up, to keep moving forward and see what we can do. And thank you for everybody who's participating online and joining into the platforms. Can I have the next slide, please? So one of the things as well is, Maren said at the very beginning, Maren's the incoming president for Solar. Another event we have, and it's posted in the other conferences, is our Learning Analytics Summer Institute. Again, this will be fully online. We've got a number of organizers who are here, who are participating. It's one immersive 6-hour workshop over a number of days, and 2 90-minute tutorials throughout the week. So over the week, we've got keynotes, we've got things. Again, it's very cost effective. We're talking more about it. We've got a little poster about it within as well, so people can ask questions to find out any more details about what's coming on and those sorts of things. And then I'm looking at looking at the chat going on. So yes, Maren is the second woman president, which we're very excited about. So yes, we're very happy with all of our presidents. We've been very lucky. We have, and I think we have almost every president here participating in LAK again, which is lovely. So of course, for George Siemens, who was our inaugural president, and was very influential, obviously, in learning analytics and setting up Solar and setting us on the path of where we are 11 years later, which is amazing. Dragon, obviously, Gasevich, who's the Dragon Factor, with all of the coming on, all of the papers and the research. We have obviously Stephanie Teasley, Abelardo Pardo, and now Maren. So it's very wonderful. We're very happy with coming on. So I think that's coming almost to the end of our first half hour of coming through. So I'm just going to, I can see where we have the questions and the chats going on, and we have Q&As. So I'm just thinking, is there anything else we need to answer? Yes, the intro slides. Yes, we can make available. We can see what's happening. Yes, the session is being recorded and will be posted. All of our sessions are being recorded, and we're trying to get them up as quickly as possible and posted into the session. The other thing too, which as Maren had said, it was open access, the open access for coming in. And we have to thank the program chairs this year. It was their initiative and their idea of coming up to get it. And so we've made that from here going forward standard, and we're in negotiations with ACM of making all of the back catalog open as well. So we're working on that, which we're very pleased to coming through. So I'm going to throw back to Nia. We're going to wrap up very shortly this opening session and welcome our first keynote speaker. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, and see you around in the next few days.
Thank you. Should we just wait a second till the top of the hour, and then I'll start the introduction for Bushu?
Exactly. So if we could just, we're going to stop this recording and then we'll start the next one. So according to mine, we only have 1 minute where we change from one to the other, which is great.
Also, for everyone who is still there, if you want to now ask questions for the keynote, please in Whova, go to the keynote session. So don't ask the questions for the keynote in the opening session. So if you click on your agenda in Whova, click on keynote number 1. So if you have any questions for the keynote speaker, please add them in the Whova session page for the keynote.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Maren. That was a really, it's very important. Please switch sessions.
You don't have to leave the Zoom. You stay.
Yeah, you
in
can
the
stay in
Zoom.
the Zoom room. This is fine. But for the Q&A, this will make it easier.
Oh, there's Javier. I can see Javier's down in the corner of my screen. There's Javier, who did all of the animations and all the visualizations. So if somebody had questions for Javier about what wonderful tool you use, they were very excited by it.
Yes. Should probably put that somewhere public. I'd like to know as well. Okay. I'm going to wait till 2:01 and then I'll go ahead and start my introduction. And then I don't know who can maybe pin Buju. Here we go. Hi, Buju. Wow, we have 250 people. That's not a bad turnout. All right. Buju, I'm just going to, I have a slide I'm going to put up while I talk about all of your amazingness, and then we'll switch over and you can share your screen. Okay. All right, are we recording, Grace?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So it is with my great pleasure that I am able to introduce to you today Nilanjana Dasgupta, or as I know her, Buju, a wonderful and colleague and friend that I had the pleasure of meeting, I think 2 years ago. Buju is a professor of psychology and an inaugural director of the Institute for Diversity Sciences at UMass Amherst. Prior to coming to UMass, she received her bachelor's degree in psychology and neuroscience from Smith College and her PhD in social psychology from Yale University. She is really leading the research on unconscious and or implicit bias. Her work shines a light on the unspoken assumptions about social groups, often called implicit stereotypes or biases, and the ways in which they impact people's evaluations of and actions towards others. She also examines how implicit biases influence people's self-perception, performance, and academic and career choices. She is well known for her translational research or her unique ability to integrate the science of implicit bias with complex social problems in the real world, moving seamlessly between research and the laboratory and naturally existing real world settings. In doing so, her research has really made a very unique impact on the social problems plaguing the US and the broader international community, including such things as employment discrimination, educational disparities in science, engineering, and mathematics, and the underrepresentation of women and racial minorities in leadership positions. And herself, she has taken on very many leadership positions within her community of social psychology and personality psychology. Her work has also been featured in numerous outlets, including the New York Times, the Atlantic, London Times, National Public Radio, Wired, Slate, and seriously, the list literally goes on. And today she's going to be talking to us. I'm really, really excited that the LAK community gets to experience her. She'll be talking to us about stemming the tide, how communal contexts, own group peers, and professionals act as social vaccines. We all need a vaccine right now, protecting underrepresented students, persistence in STEM. And again, please join me in welcoming Buju to our LAK. And with that, I will.
Thank you, Nia. Thank you, Maren. Thanks to all the organizing committee and the program chairs, and especially to Nia for bringing me into this community. It would have been great to be in sunny California. somewhere between that photograph and this photograph, I cut off all my hair, which I didn't realize looked so dramatically different. I'm going to share my screen now and show my slides. Do you all see the slides? Yes? Okay, great. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. All right, that's great. So I'm really excited about hearing your questions and comments because this is a new community to me. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts. I really wanted to think about the ways and opportunities for collaboration between social psychology and the learning analytics community. So I'm an outsider to this group. I'm an experimental social psychologist, and my work, as Nia said, is on implicit bias and its impact on inequality in many contexts. And I'm particularly interested in learning, education, and professional leadership. So I have a long-standing interest in designing theory-driven interventions that reduce inequality in learning environments. So in many ways, I see my work as being adjacent to learning analytics. And in presenting here today, I see rich opportunities for cross-fertilization between your community, learning analytics, and social psychology. So in many ways, consider this presentation as an invitation to collaborate with social psychologists in the future. So one type of inequality that I've been interested in for more than a decade is inequality in STEM pathways. Why STEM, as in science, technology, engineering, and math? Why STEM? Because STEM pathways strongly influences economic mobility. So in today's globalized world, as we all know, scientific and technological innovations are vital for economic competitiveness, national security, quality of life in nations across the world. And in the US context, there's a strong demand for a skilled STEM workforce in the 21st century. But both in North America and in Western Europe, the supply of students who are interested and skilled has lagged behind relative to demand. And this is particularly the case for women, for racial ethnic minority students, for first-generation college students. So this lagging supply occurs even though STEM jobs are very lucrative and offer a pathway towards upward social mobility. And I argue that these group disparities in STEM education contribute to income disparities between women and men, between racial ethnic groups, between social classes, even among those who hold college degrees. So even when you look at groups with college degrees, you see a gap, an income gap, and a lot of that income gap can be explained by professional pathways. So the questions that I'm interested in the research that my research group does are questions like these. Why do people choose or avoid particular academic or professional pathways, holding constant initial sort of K-12 training? How do stereotypes about gender, race, and class constrain choices? What factors allow people to deflect stereotypes and choose academic and professional pathways in STEM despite stereotypes that create barriers? And here, I'm particularly interested in using these factors to develop theory-driven interventions. So to address these questions, my students and I developed a model that I call the stereotype inoculation model. And a quick way to describe this model, which is so appropriate, much more so than I would have ever realized today than it was before, a quick way to describe this model is by using a biomedical metaphor. The idea is, just as biomedical vaccines protect and inoculate our physical body against noxious bacteria and viruses, so too, I argue, that exposure to experts and peers from one's own group, own identity group, protect and inoculate one's mind against noxious stereotypes. In other words, seeing people like oneself, seeing peers and professors and experts who are similar to one's group, similar to oneself, act as social vaccines, especially for young people in STEM. So what I want to do in my time here today is I want to tell you about 4 types of projects. Some of these are published, some of these are unpublished. I sort of wanted to give you a big range of different kinds of projects that show social vaccines in action. So I'll give you one example of the ways in which professors teaching gateway classes in STEM act as social vaccines. Another project where I'll show you how relationships with peers who are peer mentors, who are near peer mentors, act as social vaccines, especially in the transition to college. I want to give you a third example of how cohorts in living learning communities act as social vaccines, again, in the higher ed space. And finally, I want to go back earlier in development to adolescence and tell you about the ways in which communal classrooms act as social vaccines. And in telling you or giving you each example, I want to sort of bookend it with some learning analytics questions where collaborations with people like yourselves would be incredibly useful and sort of uncover questions that we don't know the answer to from social psychology today. So you'll see some themes running through all my talks, or all my projects, I should say. You'll see that all of these studies are longitudinal and they occurred in naturally existing environments. You'll see that we focus on multiple identity groups: gender, race, and social class. You'll see that some of the studies focus on young adults and others on adolescents. And all of the interventions that we focus on were inserted into these transition periods in human development. And you'll see that sort of as we go through. So in one of our early projects, we were interested in the ways in which the professors students see in the classroom in STEM might act as social vaccines. And in this case, seeing same-sex professors, female professors in STEM, might act as social vaccines for young women students in their classes. And we focused on gateway classes, particularly on calculus. Why calculus? Because calculus is sort of a prerequisite for all STEM majors, all sort of around the globe. And is often considered to be, at least here in the US, a weeder class. It's a class that if students do well, sort of is a gateway that allows them to go into the major. And if they do poorly, they might opt out or be forced to opt out of STEM majors. So we wanted to see whether in these calculus classes, whether having a same-sex professor or not would have an effect on women students. So we conducted a longitudinal study across several years here at the University of Massachusetts, where we recruited students, both women and men, from intro calc classes and followed them for the whole semester. Now, in this particular setting, there are multiple sections of calculus. There's a humongous cohort of students who are sort of divided into small sections of about 30 students each. And there were obviously many faculty teaching these classes. And we recruited students from classes, some of which were taught by women professors, some by men professors. And we tried to choose the sections where the instructors teaching the classes had similar levels of experience and had similar teaching skills. The beauty of this particular type of class is that all sections use the same syllabus, the same exams. Grading was done, de-identified across all the sections, shared across instructors. That students signed up for these sections before the professors had been assigned, so students didn't self-select into particular instructor sections. Professors and students were blind to our experimental hypotheses. And we measured a bunch of variables. In my talk today, I'm going to focus on 4. We measured students' attitudes towards mathematics compared to humanities, English in particular. And we measured it in 2 ways, both by asking them using a standard survey instrument, what we call explicit attitude measures. We asked people to self-report how much they enjoyed or did not math compared to English. We asked them how fun or boring it was. So those are explicit attitude measures. We also measured their implicit attitudes indirectly or unobtrusively without asking students direct questions. about their attitudes. And we measure a standard way to measure implicit attitudes. One of several types are these reaction time tasks that some of you may be familiar with. And so for those of you who are not, the basic gist of these reaction time tasks to capture implicit attitudes is that an attitude, boiled down to its sort of bare bones, is essentially a mental association between a concept like mathematics, for example, and a good or a bad feeling, a good or bad sentiment. So if I have strong positive attitudes towards math, when I think about math, those positive thoughts should pop into my mind quickly and easily. And negative thoughts should be slower to come to mind. But if I am math phobic, if I have a strong sort of fears and anxieties about mathematics, when I think about math, those negative thoughts should pop into mind quickly and positive thoughts should be slower to come to mind. In other words, the speed with which people associate positive or negative thoughts with mathematics compared to humanities, for example, that speed of response is an indirect measure of attitude strength. So in our study, we measured implicit preference for math relative to humanities using an implicit association test, or IAT. We also measured students' implicit identification with math, again, compared to humanities, which is to say we measured the speed with which they associated math with first-person pronouns like I, me, myself, compared to math with not me, they, them, theirs. We measured students' confidence in mathematics, calculus in particular, and with their permission, we got their end of the semester grade, their final grade in calculus. What we found is that students' implicit identification and attitudes towards math varied significantly as a function of women than men. So this is to orient you to the graph. The black bars represent women students, the gray bars are men. The two bars on your left are students who happen to be in sections taught by female professors. The two bars on the right are those taught by male professors. On the vertical axis is how strongly did they associate math with me, math with the self. And what you can see is for women students, they strongly associated, they were more implicitly identified with math when the professor was a woman rather than a man. Whereas for male students, they strongly identified with math regardless of the gender of the professor. We found a similar pattern of data when we looked at students' implicit attitudes towards math, their preference, the relative preference for math compared to humanities. So here, again, the black bars are women students, the gray bars are men. On the vertical axis, 0 is essentially their implicit equally preferring math and English. So 0 means they like both subjects equally. Negative numbers means that they prefer humanities over math. And what you can see is that for women students, they liked math and English equally when their professor was a woman, but they far preferred humanities when the professor was a man. And for male students, they liked math and English equally, again, regardless of the gender of the professor. So the common thread is that across both of these measures, for women, their implicit preferences and identification were shifting systematically as a function of the sex of the professor, but not so for male students. When we asked students to predict how they would do, which is sort of, you can think of it as a measure of confidence, women expected to do better in calculus when the professor was a woman rather than a man. Male students expected to do the same regardless of the gender of the professor. Now note, this is even though students were well aware that the grading was done in a de-identified way and shared across all faculty teaching the class. So it wasn't as if that they were expecting their women professors to be more lenient. Okay, so compare how students thought they would do, their confidence, with their actual performance in calculus. What you can see is that across all 15 sections, women did better in calculus than men, across each and every section. So what was not a problem was the ability. The women had definitely had no problems with calculus in terms of their performance. What was far more fragile was confidence. Confidence shifted systematically as a function of the sex of the professor, even though performance didn't. So based on this, so we have lots of other measures, but I want to sort of stick with the ones that I presented. Based on these, I think the kinds of learning analytics questions that come to my mind that all of you would be experts in answering is, can we use these learning analytic techniques to uncover why female instructors had more positive outcomes for female students? Is it that they fostered more in-class participation, collaboration, or active learning? Or is it, or is it that they provided more or perhaps different kinds of feedback to students that was especially beneficial for women students? It's also possible that did female students seek more help and support from their female professors? And finally, what kinds of classroom analytics would we need to capture, especially capture behavioral engagement, listening, speaking, nonverbal behavior, that we might then be able to link up with the psychological measures of the sort that I showed you. So these are the kinds of questions, more granular questions about communication that would be very useful in the kind of research that I do. So let me give you a different kind of example. I told you about professors serving as social vaccines for young women in mathematics. Now I want to give you an example about how relationships with peers might act as social vaccines. And this is the story of students when they transition from high school to university. In these transition periods from high school to university, or any transition period for that matter, students are vulnerable to self-doubt. They're vulnerable to thinking, is this the right place for me? Am I good enough for this? Is it the right path for me? And self-doubt is stronger. There's a lot of psychological research on that, when individuals feel that their identity group is vastly outnumbered in that local achievement environment that they're in, and it's a high stakes environment. So the question we were interested in is, are peer mentors particularly effective social vaccines during these periods of transition, when students are moving from one institutional setting and residential setting to a very different one? And is there a special benefit of having an own group peer mentor in this transition to college? So this time we went to engineering, a different STEM major, and we wanted to test whether students' experiences in engineering would be different as a function of whether they had a peer mentor, one, and two, whether the peer mentor was of the same sex as they. So again, we recruited several cohorts of women students this time, only women students, who were interested during the summer before they came to university, who expressed some interest in engineering. And we randomly assigned them to one of three conditions. This was a regular randomized control trial. We either gave them a female peer mentor who was a senior in the same engineering major that the student was interested in, or we gave them a male peer mentor, also the same engineering major, or in the control condition, business as usual, they had no peer mentor. The mentors were students we had trained, who had volunteered. We trained them before the mentoring started, and we gave them a bunch of guidance about what they could do, but we didn't tightly control everything that they did. But we kept track that they were meeting with their mentees. So mentor-mentees met during the mentees' first year in college, the mentor's senior year. On average, they met a couple times in the fall semester and a couple times in the spring semester. And then the mentors graduated from college. We kept track of the mentees' progress from the moment they walked into our campus. The baseline measure was before the mentors had been college, and then once every year till the mentees graduated. Okay, I'm getting a sign saying that my internet is unstable. So if I freeze, please let me know, because I wouldn't otherwise know, because you guys are not freezing on my screen. All right, so good so far? Okay, so let me show you what happened to the mentees across that first year in college when the mentoring was active. So in this figure, the black lines are students who had randomly assigned to female mentors. The gray dashed line are those randomly assigned to male peer mentors, and the gray dotted line are no mentors. On the y-axis, 0 is where the students started. So these are multi-level models. Students are the anchor, the baseline is their own individual sense of belonging in engineering when they walk through the door. What you see is that for women students, their sense of belonging in engineering stayed stable across that first year in college. Whereas for those randomly assigned to male mentors or no mentors, their feelings of belonging in engineering dropped pretty sharply from the beginning to the end of that first academic year. We found a similar pattern of data when we looked at these women's sense of self-efficacy or confidence in engineering. Self-efficacy held steady if they had female peer mentors, somewhere in the middle if they had male mentors, non-significantly different from both of those other two groups. By the end of that first year in college, 100% of students who had female mentors were still in the major. That number dropped to about 82% in the male mentor condition and about 89% in the female, in the no mentor condition, no difference between the latter two. All right, so that first year ends. The mentors graduate. We are still tracking the mentees' progress all the way through their own graduation. And so what we find is that the ripple effects of that mentoring intervention last till the students themselves graduate. So what you can see with the black line in terms of the students' anxiety relative to motivation, this is a sort of a ratio between how anxious were they about engineering versus how approach-oriented or motivated were they. So higher numbers means more anxiety on the y-axis. For women who had female mentors, peer mentors originally 4 years earlier, their anxiety in engineering doesn't change as a function over time. Those who had no mentors, their anxiety increases and their motivation, relatively speaking, drops if they had no mentors. And those who originally had male mentors are somewhere in the middle. Anxiety is still going up relative to motivation. We looked at how successful these women were at securing engineering internship across their 4 years in college. And we found that women who originally had female mentors were 21% more likely to secure engineering internships all through their years in college compared to the no mentor condition. And the male mentor group was somewhere in the middle. Women who originally had female peer mentors were 13% more likely to graduate with engineering majors than those in the no mentor condition, and the male mentor group was somewhere in the middle. Female with originally female peer mentors were 11% more likely to graduate with any STEM major, physical sciences, natural sciences, computer science, or engineering majors, excluding the social sciences, compared to those in the no mentoring condition. And again, the male mentor group was somewhere in the middle. So on multiple metrics, it's not just that while that relationship was active, did those mentors act as social vaccines, but the social vaccine effect without a booster in the middle still lingered at graduation. So the kinds of things that we don't know are, again, what was different about the communication patterns between those mentees and their female compared to male mentors. What I didn't tell you, but I should tell you here, is that we asked the mentees about their relationship with the mentors. And we asked them, how much is your mentor available to you? How supportive are they? How good is the chemistry in your mentoring relationship? How much do you relate to them? How close do you feel to them? On almost all metrics, availability, support, all of that stuff, the female and male mentors were rated equally. The only measure on which the female mentors were seen more favorably, and that the difference was the effect was small, was how close do you feel to your mentor. On only those questions did students express more closeness to the female mentors. But other than that, in terms of actual support and availability and resources and help, the male and female mentors were equally good. So we don't really have a good handle on where that difference came from, besides the psychological closeness. So what might be different about the communication patterns? Was it a difference in the content of the discussion, what they talked about? Was it about the style of the discussion? Was it about both? What digital traces would we need of those mentoring interactions to provide insight into the quality of the relationships with the mentors and link it to the student outcomes? And then how might we access those digital traces, especially given that most of the mentoring happened outside of classes. They were not necessarily on electronic platforms. So how would we capture that in real life? So those are some of the questions that I think a collaboration would be able to really answer. So here's my third example, which is not about a one-on-one relationship.
Hey, Buju.
But essentially creating a local community. And here our focus is on first generation.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, guys, we're having a little bit of a technical.
Can you see me? Can you hear me? Did I freeze?
Yeah, it just got really a really bad lag for a second. So I think it was actually like for a lag, it was good timing. So it was right at the start of the third thing. So I think we can just maybe try and say something right now.
All right, can you hear me?
Wonderful. Yeah.
All
I think we
right.
can just perfect pick it up there.
All right, let me pick it up here. Thank you for stopping me.
No problem.
All right, so here we are. Slides back up?
Yes, perfect.
Good. All right. So our focus for this, the third example I want to give you is about first generation college students. So for those of you who are outside of North America, the data in the US in particular is that first generation college students are twice as likely to leave college without earning a bachelor's degree.
Wow.
And that many students struggle to nurture the success of first gens, especially in STEM majors. So we wanted to design a theory-driven intervention for first gens, again, in that transition period to college, informed by the stereotype inoculation model. So what we focused on this time was a different kind of intervention, which was about creating a living learning community and a different type of STEM, this time in the biological sciences. So what we did is that we invited all of the incoming first generation students who are coming into university interested in biological sciences to apply to participate in a living learning community, which is essentially a residential community. And of the students who applied, we randomly sort of took half of them, and they were our intervention condition, and slightly less than half were our control condition. And as you can see, in terms of the demographics, racial and ethnic demographics was very diverse. They were more women than men, but they were all first generation college students. So this is what we call a sort of a kitchen sink intervention, where there were multiple components. So all of the students who were in the intervention group in the living learning community took intro biology together as a cohort from the same professor. They all had a first year seminar together as a cohort. They had access to a peer mentor who was a senior and upper level first gen student also in biology. The student's roommate was also in the intervention condition. And then once a semester, there was some sort of community building activity that the students participated in. In the control condition, all the students also took intro biology with the same professor, same syllabus, same exam, but this time they took that class with continuing generation students, non-first gens. They also had a first year seminar, but not necessarily with first gens. They had no peer mentor. They had a roommate, but the roommate was not matched on first gen status. They had community building, but it was not focused on first generation student sort of community building. Again, on multiple metrics, we found that being in immersion in that living learning community increased students' sense of belonging in biological sciences. So the Cohen's D there shows you the effect size of the effect. And it's a sort of a moderately a robust effect size of participation in the living learning community. Being in that community produced less anxiety and worry in students about their ability in biological sciences compared to the control condition. Being in that living learning community made them see their ability, especially in STEM, using a growth mindset, which basically means that they understood their ability as something that grows with practice and effort, just as muscles grow with exercise and practice. They didn't see it as a fixed talent they either had or didn't, but they saw it as something that would grow with effort and learning. And finally, their grades were 10% higher in biology if they were in that community than if they weren't. And finally, we found that participating in the living learning community predicted significantly better grades through a reduction in anxiety and worry. And these are data we are still collecting. So what we're doing now is we're tracking the students after that first year in college to see where students who participate in the living learning community end up. Are they more likely to stay in the life science majors if they did that, experience that in that first year of college than if they didn't? So that's sort of the stuff that we're still doing now. So in terms of the learning analytics follow-up questions is, can we use social learning analytics to understand how living learning community environments help students learn both inside formal classrooms and then outside those classrooms. Again, what kind of digital traces would we need to provide some insight into both learning, sort of formal learning, and maybe even learning the culture of science? It seems to me that capturing learning and social connection in informal settings outside of the classroom or outside of learning management systems may be particularly challenging. So are there learning analytics tools that could be useful for that? And then again, to what extent do these learning behaviors, if we were able to capture them, predict students' persistence and performance? All right, so in the last example I'm going to shift to an earlier stage of life. So I've become really interested in adolescent development, in sort of social development, because it's abundantly clear to me that really the interventions are likely to be more impactful if we insert them earlier in development, when kids' sense of interest and their sense of themselves, their identity, is still malleable, rather than getting them when they are 4, 5, 6 years old, much older, when their interests have crystallized more. So what we wanted to do is to try and understand what kind of classroom communities, especially in mathematics, might serve as social vaccines for adolescents. And we focused on the 8th grade because there's a lot of data showing in the US context that 8th grade algebra does a really good job in predicting what students do in high school STEM and whether those students will major in STEM in university. And 8th grade math, controlling for lots of other variables, continue to predict that. So we wanted to locate a study in 8th grade. So there were two kind of features of communal classrooms that we focused on. One is the extent to which kids thought that their class emphasized the ways in which math was relevant to the real world, relevant to social problems. And two, the extent to which kids felt that math was taught in a way that was collaborative, not individual learning necessarily, but group work. So the questions we were interested in, the research questions were, do communal classrooms that emphasize these two types of communality, social relevance and collaboration, enhance adolescents' math identification, so their self-concept, enhance their classroom participation, enhance their math performance? And do these benefits accrue through 3 specific psychological mediators that you've seen before: sense of belonging in that space, self-efficacy or confidence, and challenge or sort of an approach motivation. And our third question was, we wanted to see whether these communal classrooms would produce an extra benefit for Black and Latinx students who were in these schools and in these classes in predominantly white classes. So we recruited almost 3,000 students from 10 middle schools across the US, from California to Texas to Pennsylvania to Delaware, or both coasts. We measured at the beginning of the academic year the degree to which kids thought, so this is kids' perceptions of how much they were working with other peers in class, and the degree to which the math they were learning in 8th grade was relevant to social problems and relevant to their own interests. We measured towards the end of the academic year their sense of belonging in class, their self-efficacy in math, their challenge motivation. And at the end of the academic year, we measured their math self-concept, their identification, how much it mattered to them how much math mattered to them, how interested and how much they spoke up in class. And with their parents' permission, we got their grades in math. So what I'm going to show you are multi-level models where students are embedded in classrooms and teachers and embedded in schools. And so what we found overall is that emphasis on social relevance in class predicted better grades, more class participation, more identification with math. Emphasis on peer collaboration predicted grades and class participation, but not more identification. Remember, we were interested in whether these benefits of what kids perceived in their classroom would predict these outcomes mediated through these three psychological variables, belonging, challenge, and self-efficacy. So I'm going to show you a mediation model, but I'm going to break it down by focusing on each mediator at a time, just for visual simplicity. So what you can see is that classes that emphasize social relevance and collaboration significantly predicted greater belonging, and belonging in turn predicted more class participation and identification in math. Classes that emphasize social relevance but not collaboration necessarily predicted more challenge motivation, and challenge predicted class participation and identification. And finally, classes that emphasize social relevance but not collaboration predicted confidence or self-efficacy, and that predicted all three outcomes. So the gist of it is that there was more social relevance had more bang for the buck. Emphasis on social relevance links, when in teaching math, predicted all three psychological mediators: greater belonging, more confidence, more motivation, and predicted all three outcomes at the back end. And collaboration predicted belonging and two of the three outcomes. Remember, we were also interested in the kids of color, especially in the Black and Latinx kids and the multiracial kids in those classrooms. And we found, as we predicted, that belonging had strong benefits for racial minority kids in terms of grades and math identification. And this is what it looks like. So for kids of color who felt a sense of belonging in these predominantly white math classes, that belonging predicted significantly better grades in math at the end of the academic year. That association between belonging and grades wasn't there for the white kids. Significantly stronger belonging also predicted more identification with math for all kids, but that association was stronger for our Black and brown kids than they were for the white kids. And belonging in turn was predicted by both communal features of the class, both social relevance and collaboration. So here are the final sort of the gist of the takeaways, that our research overall, and I could give you lots of other examples, which I might, depending on the questions you asked, both people and places can act as social vaccines to protect young people's resilience, persistence, and success in STEM. On the people front, we find that relationships with own group peers act as social vaccines for both women and first-generation college students. And in the case of mentoring, we find that the benefits of those social vaccines can endure for many years after the vaccine is done, just like a real vaccine. On the places front, learning communities that create a sense of connection, where learning has social meaning, acts as social vaccines. And we find that communal learning context particularly attracts students of color by strengthening their sense of belonging. In all our research across the past 15 or 20 years, we found that these interventions have the biggest bang for the buck when they're inserted into these developmental transition periods, transition from middle school to high school, transition from high school to college. And actually some work we are doing now is looking at the transition from college to the workforce in technology and engineering. I think this sort of research opens up opportunities for new interdisciplinary collaborations between learning analytics and social psychology. There are lots of unknowns waiting to be discovered. And I think your participation in that and collaborative communities would be really impactful in uncovering some of the more granular answers. So I always say that in science, it's we, not me. Even though we present as individuals, behind me, imagine a large team of people, my grad students and postdocs, past and present, colleagues in engineering and biology, and in mathematics who've opened doors and made this research possible. A large posse of undergraduate students who collect data, code data, without whom none of this research would be possible. And finally, funding from the National Science Foundation that's funded our work for the last, my entirety of my career thus far, without which these sort of labor-intensive studies would really not be possible. And I also want to say thank you and anything that I've presented, unless they are yet unpublished, you can download the full text articles from my website. I often push out my work on Twitter. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, and I'll follow you back, and on LinkedIn as well. And I would love to take your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see all of you more clearly. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. That was so fascinating, Viju. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm super excited. So I will be moderating the session for Viju. And as you guys know, we already have a few questions. If you have in the Q&A session, section on the Whova system, I'm going to call on you to ask your question. So just unmute yourself. And obviously you don't have to put it in text after we get, there's 3 now in the chat, and you feel free to, after we get through those, you can just ask the question. I do want to also say that we have until basically the top of the hour. And then we'll have the 30-minute break where we're going to go do the networking thing. And then we're going to have a 30-minute session. So a Q&A session for Viju. So there's a link to that in the schedule. Okay. So
also, can I just say, I don't see chat, so I don't see your question. So I'll only see it through Nia, or if you speak up.
Yes, thank you, Viju. So Marcel, you have a great question that already 5 people have voted up. Do you mind sharing that with us? You can unmute yourself.
I'm trying to.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for this great keynote. Loved it. The question I put out there was that you are talking these great examples about this vaccination. And I was wondering, does this work for every topic? Like in our community in learning analytics, we work on a daily basis trying to convince teachers and students to grasp the meaning of learning analytics and to get it. It's kind of getting them equal to how we believe that learning analytics can do these things for them and enriching education. So do you think that this kind of vaccination techniques could also work spreading out the world of learning analytics to our students and teachers in practice?
That's a really great question. So my knowledge of the learning analytics community is partial. So I think if the community is one where there's a group of people who somehow, so let me back up. The social vaccine idea is particularly relevant as a way to combat stereotypes, right? As a way to see yourself in a community where you otherwise don't see yourself. So if the teachers you're trying to reach fall in that category, that they see that there is some sort of pre-existing stereotype, perhaps false, that exists, and they see themselves as not being part of the community, then I think, yes, that having peers or professionals or social meaning, things that are relevant to them, should be impactful in allowing them to use learning analytics techniques in their teaching, in their professional development. But I don't know what the teacher stereotypes are about learning analytics or why they might be intimidated.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So maybe you can elaborate on it, or somebody else can, which would help.
No, yeah, I think that the answer is helping, because you actually say it's about stereotypes, it's about the intimidation, and I think a lot of students and teachers fear learning analytics, and by giving the answer that it doesn't always have to do, in your typical research is about equality and especially with STEM courses, but it can be translated to other kinds of topics as well.
Yeah.
And it would be great to do some research on that, to use the examples you have shown in this particular area, in our area, to spread out this learning analytics vaccine Thank you.
Yeah, I can see this helped. I can see if it's the intimidation factor, I can see taking the same elements and generalizing it and to learning analytics and having as participants teachers or teachers in training.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcel, and thank you, Buju. That was a great back and forth. So our second question, I will open it up for, and I apologize if I butcher anybody's name, QG, and well, I can say it too. What are the implications of these studies in virtual learning environments?
Yeah, so that is a really good question, and one that is more relevant than you would think, because Nia and I had been talking about doing sort of a line of research looking at the impact of testing the impact of social vaccines in online learning compared to in-person learning. I would guess that the effects would be stronger. Online learning.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, you're back.
Yes.
You're back.
Did I freeze again? I'm back.
No,
okay.
just yeah.
I think that online learning is predicated on self-directed individual learning, typically. And self-directed individual learning doesn't work very well. I think one of the things we've seen in our research is that for all three groups that are the focus of my work thus far, first gens, girls and women, and students of color, there's a strong preference for communal learning rather than individual sort of learning in a decontextualized way. So I think, especially for these three groups, my prediction would be if we did a side-by-side comparison of these interventions in in-person classes versus online classes, that the effects would be stronger online, because it provides sort of a connection with the real person in a way that the online world doesn't allow you to have. Even when it's synchronous, I think the sense of relationships are sort of more watered down than it is in real life.
Yes.
Great question.
That was a very wonderful question, close to home. Blazinka, would you like to jump in and ask your question? Okay, I will ask it. So another question is, can it be said that a hidden assumption in your first research is that women math teachers are more inclined to teach math innovatively, ? Or that female students learn math in a different way than male students?
I'm sorry, I didn't have mic on. So first of all, thank you very much. It was great to hear this summary of your research. It's really great. But of course, it is I would say, a very natural and obvious explanation for your first case that actually the role model is very strong, and it means that it helps female students to be much more successful in math. But probably there are some other explanations. One, I'm actually a professor of mathematics. That's the reason I'm particularly interested in the topic. And sometimes I think that we can also think about it. Maybe female students are learning maths differently, and maybe female professors are using much more let's say, innovative methods of teaching, different pedagogies, have different approaches that are much more responding to the needs of female students. Right. Maybe just to comment on that.
Yeah, your alternative explanations are really good ones. So let me give you, tell you what I know, what we can rule out, and then tell you what we don't know, which remain viable alternative explanations. So we picked those the teachers or the classes trying to match the years of experience and essentially their teaching skills. And also my grad student collaborators on this paper sat in on their classes and rated them, not every day, but like I think a smattering of probably a week of classes in terms of their teaching style, their warmth, their teaching style, and so on. On those very rough metrics, there were no differences. In terms of how warm and fuzzy the instructors were, if they were more warm and fuzzy the women, no, they weren't. There was no difference. There were warm and fuzzy men, there were warm and fuzzy women, there were aloof male instructors, there were aloof women instructors, all kinds. So on those very rough metrics, there were no differences that we could tell. But what we don't know is if we were to use some learning analytics tools to measure across the whole semester active learning, who they called on, how often they called on people, or did people ask questions. We did have some indicators that students in the beginning, there were women and men asked questions equally. Towards the end of the semester, women asked more questions than men, if they were in the women's faculty's classes. We don't have a good handle on those granular processes in the classroom. So we don't know if the women use more innovative teaching in a way that I feel confident that we could say. The only thing we know is really much more at a surface level based on a certain number of classroom observations that my graduate students did in all of these classes. And those didn't yield any differences. Your question is a really good one, and that's why these collaborations would be important to do.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Buju. Okay, so we have several more questions in the chat, but we're about 5 minutes out. So would you like to try and tackle one more, or should we just pause here and then? So these chats will remain in your Whova section, so you can always go back and if these people aren't allowed or not able to come to your Q&A session, right? You can go in and respond to them at any point using text.
If we have 4 more minutes, why don't we do one more, and then I'll be back here in another half hour. I'd love to hear more questions.
Okay,
comments.
Wonderful. So our next question is from Patricia, and I asked her to unmute. Just ask her.
Hi, I am Melchor Sanchez. For some reason, the system has Patricia and Melchor in the same.
Okay.
Go ahead, Melchor.
I am a physician, a pediatrician, so I loved your vaccine metaphor. But difference with vaccines in biology is that we know exactly how they work at the molecular level, the dose and the time periods, etc. But social interventions can have several mechanisms, many of which we do not even understand. So I wonder some thoughts about the adverse effects of social inoculations. I saw that some of these male mentors can have toxic effects on the female students, and the cost effectiveness, because if we want to use these results in practice, I don't know, what do you think about the cost of implementing these changes?
I love the side effects. I should have, I'm going to start using that language. So I should say there were practically no negative effects of male mentors or the male instructors. Usually there were no difference from controls. Whenever we had the control group, like the mentoring experiment, the longitudinal experiment, male mentors were no different from the controls. The group that was different were female mentors. But I would say that in our follow-on on the peer mentoring study, we found what I think of as sort of a sleeper effect. So remember, I showed you that male mentors had no impact on women's sense of belonging and self-efficacy in the beginning, in that first year of college. But at the end, what we found when we followed the mentees across time, that after the male mentors were gone, both mentoring conditions actually did have an equal benefit on the students' feelings of belonging in engineering. But it didn't happen in year one. It happened in sophomore year, junior, it happened later on. We don't really know why there was this delayed effect of the male mentor, or not on all metrics, but specifically on belonging and self-efficacy. And our sort of our post hoc conjecture is that working with a male mentor may have made these women mentees just get more comfortable being in an environment where there were mostly men, in a way that they probably didn't experience in high school. But now they were in engineering, almost all the students, 80% of the students in their classes were men. And having a male mentor may have in some way made that just more comfortable. And that effect may not have shown up in that first year, but showed up later. So anyway, my short answer is that we don't find that male mentors or male vaccines have a negative effect. We just find that they are no different from the controls. But you asked me something else that I'm forgetting. Can you ask me the second part of your question?
About, I mean, if you want to implement your findings in practice.
Oh, the effort.
Some financial or economic implications.
Yes. Yes, that's a big one. So that question I hear that a lot, that if we're reliant on having same sex or same race, or especially if they're faculty mentors or faculty representatives, though that change happens slowly. And if we only recruit women to play these roles or faculty of color to play these roles, they will get burnt out. And that's not necessarily their job, and it's not equitable. I think the peer effects are where I lean on more. Having cohorts of people coming in together, having cohorts of students coming in together, the living learning community kinds of things, or having not even living learning, but having cohorts of students who have a sense of community with students like themselves is much more cost effective. And it's also cost effective because it reduces attrition. So it's not that it prevents having a revolving door when students come in, but then the attrition out by the first 2 years of college. So I think cohorts of peer interventions are one thing. And then the second sort of more cost-effective way might be interventions that, this goes back to the earlier question, that have some online component where you can leverage something like Zoom, especially things that are synchronous and online, to expand the impact of the intervention beyond face-to-face, beyond in-person face-to-face.
This is so fascinating. So that was, yeah, I'm really glad. It's a great question to end on and a wonderful answer to end on. So it is 3:01. Why doesn't everybody run over and join the network table session and go ahead and grab a seat and get randomly assigned into your groups? It'll be like, I don't know why they call it that. It should be like, what is that thing called? Speed date, but for like academics. So go and meet everyone. And thank you again so much, Buju, for this incredibly fascinating talk. And I think, like you said, there's so many areas of collaboration that it kind of makes my head spin. And then we will meet you back using a different link for a 30-minute Q&A with Buju in about 30 minutes. All right. Thank you so much, Buju.
Thank you. I'll see you guys in a half hour.
Okay. Bye.
Well done.
Thanks. Who was that?